So my name is René. I was born and raised in Sarasota, Florida, but my family is originally from Slovakia. Both of my parents were born in Czechoslovakia, which is a country that no longer exists, which is a fun fact. Czech Republic and Slovakia split in 1992, I believe. And my whole life I've been a swimmer, and I was eventually recruited to swim at Columbia University for Division I swimming. And yeah, at Columbia, I studied biology and Russian language and culture, and a little bit of linguistics as part of my Russian language concentration. It's interesting. My parents actually moved, or my mom rather, was the first one to move to the US. And originally she wanted to come to the US. She came to the US with her friend. They were essentially my age at the time, and maybe even younger than me at this point. And they kind of just went to the US, to Florida, to learn English so they could have sort of better work opportunities. And then they were actually planning on going back to Slovakia. But there's a lot of stuff that I guess just ended up rooting my mom to stay in the US. But even before that, one of the biggest reasons that she wanted to, go to the US and study English and eventually move there was because there was, a lack of opportunities that came along with socialism in Slovakia. And this was largely due to just having, for example, my mom graduated basically like the equivalent of a US high school, so kind of like high school back in Slovakia. She was like second in her class, like super smart. And when it came to applying to university, she actually wasn't able to go to university because my family lacked like socialist ties. So it was very frustrating for her to, navigate a world like that. So, she took a leap and she moved to the US. And then my dad, who she was dating at the time in Slovakia, ended up following her there. And now my whole mom's side of the family is in the US, in Sarasota, which is my hometown. And actually, I've always been very in touch with my Slovak background. When I was like 1 year old, I went back to Slovakia. My mom always made sure to take me when I was young. I have dual citizenship with the country, and Slovak was actually my first language, even though I was born in the US. So I actually went to, I think it was preschool and a little bit of kindergarten where I barely even knew English, but my mom was like, when you're a kid, you just pick up a language very easily. So yeah, there's a lot more stuff to that story, but that's kind of the basics to it. I think that's interesting. I think maybe when I was younger, I would have said more Slovak. But now I would say, uh, yeah, a little bit more American than Slovak. Yeah. But I think being in Europe this summer has helped me come back to my European roots maybe a little bit more. I was the first person born in my family, born in the US, and I think it was very important for my parents to get me to Slovakia as much as they could when I was younger because, as like at that time, my grandparents still had not moved to the US. So my mom wanted to like make sure I meet all of my family, that my family sees me. And looking back, it was definitely a good idea, even for like picking up the language really well at a young age. So when I was younger, I traveled a lot, and then eventually I traveled with my grandparents. And then around middle school, I would say I'd go at least every other summer until I was about 13, 14 years old because I started getting serious with swimming. So when I got serious with swimming, I wasn't able to take summers off because I was training a lot. I think that a lot of people, were interested in like the fact that I speak another language that they probably have never heard of. I did have a lot of friends growing up that were actually Slovak, and the Slovak community in my hometown was very tight for a long time. So, I grew up with a bunch of Slovak friends. Even when we all ended up being in Slovakia at the same time as kids, we would all meet up in our hometowns and stuff. So that was very interesting. But other than that, I don't really have a clear memory of anyone really um, questioning my background in any way, but I think that, okay, so actually, the biggest thing that the kids were interested in, especially in my neighborhood, was my mom's food. So, like, everyone would flock to my house to eat my mom's soup because Slovak people love eating soup year round, like very hearty meal, very hearty soups. So, yeah, the kids always loved coming to my house to eat food. And in that way, they embraced my heritage, I guess. Yeah, my journey with swimming has been very interesting. So I started, I want to say, first or second grade of elementary school. And I remember it was winter, and in the winter, Florida gets pretty cold outside. Like, considering we have only outdoor pools, so you're only swimming outside really. And I remember it was like a really cold day, and my mom was like, "We're gonna go and you're gonna try out for the swim team." Um, so I like did not want to go at all. I was like screaming, crying, like I was really not wanting to go because I knew it was cold outside and I knew that I was gonna have to swim in an outdoor pool. So yeah, so I so I go and I guess I do fairly well. I get over being cold, whatever. And I swim for years kind of just recreationally. Like I go, almost every day. Sometimes I would miss a practice throughout elementary school. And then sixth and seventh grade is when I really started getting competitive. Because I had a few teammates that had moved from Texas and they were like very, very fast. And I ended up going to the same school as them and stuff, or they moved to my school rather. And so that motivated me a little bit and I started getting faster. I started qualifying for like bigger meets. And that ultimately led me to deciding that I would want to be recruited to swim Division One at the collegiate level for a university. And yeah, I mean, I think that I've always been very, I think that, first of all, this is kind of veering off the track of me talking about swimming, but I think swimming and school always went very hand in hand for me. So this is why I'm saying it. Ultimately, like my parents came to the US for better opportunities. So they always made sure that, I took my academics very seriously. But I think that me personally, even without them putting any pressure on me, I also really enjoyed school. So I kind of decided like I was wanting to go to an Ivy League because they had good swimming, but they had even better academics. So yeah, when I was getting recruited, I basically focused on those schools only. And yeah, I mean, I think also Ivy League schools really value first generation low income students. So that's kind of like where I ended up going because they had really good financial aid as well. So that's how I kind of ended up swimming for Columbia. They ended up flying me on a recruiting trip out to New York City when I was the beginning of my senior year of high school. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed New York City more than I expected to. And yeah, the rest is history. And I just graduated, so it's crazy. Yeah, I mean, once I got like to middle school, I think it was seventh and eighth grade, we started doing what you call doubles in the swimming world, which is doing two practices a day, at least 3 days a week. So I would do at that in middle school, school didn't start as early. So we could just wake up at like, I think it was like 6 a.m. for practice. You'll see what I mean by not so early in comparison to high school. So we would wake up at like 6 a.m., go to practice, and after school we'd come back. And, I think what motivated me is one, I'm a very competitive person. And, when I started getting good at swimming, I became even more competitive with myself. And also, I think it was very fun because even though Florida swimming was very intense, there were a lot of like, most of my friends that I had were in swimming rather than like just having school friends, or even the friends that I had at school were the people on the swim team. So we were very tight-knit group, especially in middle school. So I think that's kind of why I fell in love with the sport. And eventually at swim meets, I made a lot of friends in Florida. So I would meet friends from different teams like every time I was competing. So that was super fun. And I'd see them over and over throughout the years. And Yeah, so in high school I got even, it got even more intense. The competition got a lot harder, and we had to wake up for morning. This was the hardest part of swimming. Waking up at 4, it was like 4:15 a.m. for practice because our this wasn't every day, but it was Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We woke up at 4:15 a.m. because school started at like 7:15, so we had to get up early to do the practice. And then after school ends, you go back to the pool. So we had nine practices a week is how it worked. I was always in higher level classes when I was since elementary school, basically. So I think one, like learning very early on to like stay very focused at school was important for me. I remember when I first got into like the advanced classes in elementary school was like third grade. You know, my mom had to kind of make sure I stayed on track and stuff like that. And then throughout middle school, I think in sixth grade, it was always when I kind of leaped over to the next level of school was when I struggled a little bit. But then I don't remember exactly why, but I started really liking school in seventh and eighth grade, and I started really liking science, especially then, so like STEM stuff. And it was kind of just an intrinsic motivation. And then once I really had to start juggling, school and swimming was in high school. And I remember I moved to it was, I don't know what the right word for it is. It's kind of like it's like a magnet charter school. So it's not private, and it was still part of the county school system, but you needed like a test to get in basically. And that school is like basically minimum honors classes, all AP classes. It's called Pineview School. So that's where I went. And yeah, so ninth grade was definitely a jump for me, my freshman year of high school. And I think that's the time where I really started like making sure I stayed on top of my schoolwork. And I was like, okay, if I want to be recruited, I need to make sure I manage my time wisely. So I think it was over the years, sort of, every month, just learning what worked for me. And the same happened once I got to college, really. I wish I could give you something more tangible, but I think for everyone, it's very different. I think you need to have a schedule that works for you. And in college, it all changed because, in high school, you have classes that are one after another, and then you're done with school for the day, and then you go to practice. In college, sometimes I had a class at like 6 p.m., which I was like so not used to, so I would wake up in the morning, go to practice and lift weights, and then take like one or two classes, practice again, and then I would go potentially to another class because a lot of my discussion sections were at night, which was very difficult for me. Yeah, so I think it was kind of ever changing, ever evolving. But I think the number one way that I made sure, I stayed on top of everything was, in order to stay focused, you always need to make sure that you have something that relaxes you and recharges you. So for me, it was literally just like making sure at night I had time to like watch Netflix or something, like something that I just enjoyed so I could recharge. So yeah, that's definitely something that kept me sane. It's a hard question because there's very smart people in every sport. I think that at the Ivy League schools, it happens less because you kind of need, even before I was recruited at Columbia, you have to be pre-screened, and they have to make sure that you actually could get in, like just as a regular student before you're actually recruited as an athlete. So you have to have a certain standard even then. But I'm also a big believer that like every single person has their own type of intelligence. As cliche as that may sound, like everyone has their own knack. Like for example, I wish I could have gone even further in athletics, but I think that, that just maybe wasn't for me in the end. Like I wish I could have made the Olympics, but maybe it's just not my path. It's not like where all of my talent lies. But yeah, of course, there's a stereotype like that some teams aren't as smart as others. But in terms of swimming, I mean, swimming is like, at Columbia at least, some of the smartest people I've ever met have been on the swim team, and the work ethic is absolutely insane. And I think that's also something being around people like that makes like forces you to become like the people that you hang out with are the people that you become, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. I just really enjoyed biology, chemistry a lot ever since I was in seventh and eighth grade. I remember, especially when I was taking like life sciences, earth sciences, and then once I took chemistry in my freshman year of high school, I just really, really enjoyed it. So then I ended up going actually in high school, I went a more chemistry focused route. I went chemistry honors, AP chemistry, and then my school actually offered like a basic organic chemistry, which was a very great sort of way to expose me to a higher level of chemistry. Um, so yeah, and then I took just honors biology and AP biology. And I'm trying to think what else. I didn't take a physics class in high school, but yes, I essentially centered my college application around I think that I was originally biochemistry. Yeah. And then eventually I decided to change to just biology in college. Yeah, it's very interesting because a lot has changed. I mean, when I was in high school, I kind of just I mean, I think as someone who's a first generation American, coming from a family that, coming from like generations of people in my family who have never made much money, you know, I kind of felt like society, I mean, in a way, I thought I would be going to be a doctor essentially. And I was pre-med once I got into Columbia being biochemistry and pre-med, and that's all I was studying. Um, and in the back of my mind, it was kind of like, oh, like it's a good way to make money. I like STEM. I'm good at STEM. So how about I go and do that? And so I felt a little bit like, pressured by that, monetary aspect, the financial aspect. Coming from a family like I did, I felt like I needed to go into that profession to make money. And also, I didn't really know what a doctor entailed when I was in high school. And when you're in high school, you also don't know really much about anything. You're just very young. And I think that going to Columbia really broadened my horizon to just like show me how many things there are in the world that you can do. It was just absolutely amazing. And it was definitely a learning curve. And by junior year in college, I kind of decided like, oh, like maybe pre-med isn't right for me. But I'll still finish up my biology degree. And actually, my junior year, I pivoted away from, the pre-med side of things and more into where biology and healthcare meet business. So I worked at Pfizer for my junior internship. And before that, I actually worked as a frontline worker at a COVID laboratory. And that was my freshman year when we were online during the pandemic. So I was still at home in Florida and I picked up a part-time job at a COVID laboratory, which was very interesting. Freshman year, I did COVID laboratory. Sophomore year, I worked for the same boss, but my boss was a very successful entrepreneur and she started a startup. And it's called pharmacogenetic testing. It's called PGX for short. And it tests 13 of your liver enzymes to prevent adverse drug reactions. So for example, someone takes a medication that the doctor gives you and you don't know that you have a sensitivity to it, and it could potentially cause death. So that's what this test is trying to essentially prevent. And then those experiences ultimately got me at my internship in Pfizer, which was also tied to a fellowship at Columbia, which was very interesting. And it paid off some of my school, which was nice as well. I think that, being in New York City, I was very excited to go to New York City. And then at one point I was a little bit scared because everything had changed so drastically, like from when I had visited when I was young. So, well, I mean, first of all, being in a COVID laboratory as a frontline worker my freshman year was like an experience that very few people can say my age. So that was absolutely unreal. And it was really interesting once I got to school sophomore year because we still had COVID and it still was not a regular year because we still had new strains coming out. So we were online most of the fall semester. And then my spring semester was the first one that we were actually in person. And it was a bit shocking for sure. Coming into like a real classroom, having tests just in front of you rather than online, like in the comfort of wherever you're living. So getting used to that again was definitely very interesting. Yeah. And I feel like even with swimming, I had lost a lot of momentum. I was coming, I think that my senior year, I suffered from an injury in my leg and I wasn't able to compete for months. And then I finally got back to, sort of into shape to compete again. And right when I got to the meet, we drove 2 hours to get to Orlando. And all of a sudden, right when we got to the hotel, the mayor of Florida was like, no, you can't compete. There's no competitions. We have to drive back. So I felt like that was very, like, I worked so hard for nothing and I healed myself for nothing. And then I trained a little bit during COVID. And, once I got to Colombia, I felt like I was kind of sad because I was out of shape again and I lost a little bit of motivation. But once we got back in person at school, my academics and swimming kind of flourished again. I had some more motivation. So I guess what I'm saying is that there were very many, it was kind of like waves. Like you had your highs and your lows during COVID like everyone else did. But I think that I did well in taking advantage of the opportunities that I could get. And it definitely set me aside as a candidate now, like when I was applying for jobs. Actually, I think Colombia does have like a good social scene, I'd say. We still have plenty of sorority, or just Greek life in general, actually. We just have plenty of that. So I think that's kind of what keeps a little bit of a spark still, for sure. And yeah, I mean, just being in New York City, people like to go out and people like to have fun and people like to socialize. Our campus is very small, so everyone's very interconnected. You just see you see people walking by you every day, like the same people. You see your friends all the time. And I think that definitely is conducive to sort of a more social atmosphere. But I don't know. I wouldn't really say more than any other school I know. Yeah. I kind of think NYU's the same. There's a lot of nightlife in New York City, so people like to take advantage of it. Yeah, personally for me, I think that having a campus was very beneficial to me because, yeah, although we are very integrated into like the Upper West Side community and like the further Manhattan, area, like for me, I think going to NYU would have been a struggle because there is no like real, I mean, this is my stereotype about NYU. There's no like central campus. Yeah, you just don't really have that. Like your quad is Washington Square Park. Like for me, it was nice that we had like, the steps on the library, the Butler Lawns, stuff like that. So I really liked our campus. And I honestly think having gone to every single Ivy League school for competitions, that Columbia's campus is the most beautiful and the most well-maintained. And I will always stand by that. So I'm very proud that I was able to go there. Yeah, I mean, I think it was a good mix of having campus and being integrated into the city. About your last point, I'm not really sure, but I've had very mixed emotions myself about our core curriculum, which is I think what you're referring to a little bit. I wasn't a fan of every single core curriculum class that I took, but I think that's kind of the point of taking those classes. So for example, like some people literally will like take this frontiers of science class where they literally teach you like what is on the frontiers of science, what is completely new in science, like quantum mechanics, for example. And they'll teach you something in every discipline of science. And some people all of a sudden gain this new interest and they're like switching a major in their next semester. So I think it's absolutely amazing. And for me, what I really liked about the core curriculum was the language requirement. So even though I could have easily tested out of a language requirement since I'm bilingual in English and Slovak, and I had taken Spanish for 3 years in high school, I had always I think because I grew up bilingual, had a very big interest in foreign language acquisition. So I was like, I'm gonna do Russian. Um, and so I ended up really liking learning the language. I ended up loving the PhD students that taught the first 2 years of language classes. And so, um, I didn't think I was going to be able to continue studying that up until senior year. But funny story, what happened was I was so inspired by all the language class that I had taken and just by the department itself, because the department was absolutely amazing. Um, so it was basically junior year, I didn't take any Russian language classes or anything because I didn't think I was going to have space to fulfill a concentration or kind of what is just a minor at Columbia. I think it was like 2 weeks before we started our semester this last academic year, last summer. I just decided I was gonna like finish up the classes, and that's how I got my concentration in Russian language and culture, and that's how we met at the conference. So it's funny how that happens. And other classes in the core, I didn't love. Like I didn't love music hum, for example. It just wasn't for me. But at the end of the day, when you go to Columbia College, that is a unifying thread that every single person in Columbia College has that they can connect to. They've read almost all the same books from literal presidents that have read these books, and now I'm reading them. Like we've taken the same courses. But at the same time, I do think Columbia takes the changing of the times very seriously, and there is a constant sort of, I guess they kind of have a board of elected people that make sure that the curriculum stays fresh. Every 1 or 2 years, they vote on specific things. That's kind of out of my knowledge. I don't exactly know what they do, but or how often they do it, but I do know that it exists and they put an effort to keep things fresh. So one, I'd say do what makes you happy. Always follow what your heart says. I think that I wish I knew, I think that I would have liked to explore other things academically more than I did, rather than kind of taking classes that I didn't love all the time. And now I'm literally going into, I'm not even working at all anything related to my major, which is, that's how it happens sometimes. But yeah, it's interesting. I went from wanting to do pre-med, go and get an MD and go to med school, to now I'm moving to Los Angeles and I'm working at a startup in athletics. So, everything always changes, and, I'm planning on going to grad school in the future, but, I'm going to just follow my heart and see where that leads me. Yeah. And always on that note, keep an open mind, just explore new things. And my third one kind of also ties into the last two, which is use your intuition. Always go with what your gut tells you. And again, what makes you happy. My fourth one is put time into socializing as you do to studying. I think that, having a network of people is very important. Maintaining very solid friendships and making sure you stay in touch with your family is always incredibly important. So make sure you call your parents when you're in school abroad. And yeah, I think that, also not to make, talking to people into something more than just socializing, but your network is also very important, and you'd be surprised by people that you have been kind to in the past, the kind of opportunities that they could provide you. So, always be nice to people and, meet people with open arms. And then, of course, be kind to yourself and give yourself a grace. You're going to make a lot of mistakes along the way, but you have to understand that, not everything is the end of the world. For example, when I just got a grade that I didn't like in my second semester of organic chemistry, and I was so devastated, and I just did very poorly that semester in my classes. But I was just like, I struggled with a lot of things. I did my best, and all I could do is do better in the next, academic year, which was this last year, my senior year. And I really did so much better. So, yeah, just be kind to yourself. And then I'm going to add a sixth one because it just popped up in my head. But I think as someone who grew up a first generation student, I had to navigate all of my resources, kind of alone, because my parents never went to school in the US and I was the first person in my family born in the US. So that came with a lot of difficulties. And at Columbia, any college that you go to nowadays actually has really good initiatives for, you know, any sort of niche that you may be. So for me, it's obviously first generation low income. There's so many fellowships, there's so many grants, there's so many opportunities that the school or programs that you apply to will give you. So make sure you look for those things and you seek them out. And, for example, also another, this may be a little bit on brand, but I know that there is a organization out of Colombia called Brave Generation, which mentors Ukrainian students to help them apply to European and US schools. So, there's many things out there for everyone, even to just try to help you get into college abroad. So yeah, look at your resources and use them to your advantage because they're out there to help you. Thank you so much for watching. My name's Renee, and feel free to reach out to me anytime on Instagram. Thank you guys.